This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Zehr. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, show number 552. This is your spoiler-free place for Star Wars community and conversation. I'm your host, Dan Zehr, thrilled to be talking Star Wars with each and every one of you. You can support Coffee with Kenobi by following the show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Help spread the word by tweeting that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. CWK is a proud member of the Spreaker Prime program. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. If you are interested in a no-cost, no-obligation quote for your next vacation, check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zehr sent you. Thank you also to members of the CWK Alliance. Find out how you can join the Alliance for as little as $1 a month to get access to exclusive podcasts, videos, and much more at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. On today's show, David W. Collins of Skywalker Sound, and so many other things. I know you know his voice. I know you know his incredible work on The Bad Batch, on Obi-Wan Kenobi, on so many shows that we know and love. He's a gentleman and a scholar, and I can't wait to share the conversation with all of you. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee for his first appearance on Coffee with Kenobi, he is a sound designer, a mixer for Star Wars animation and television. He's also a voice actor and the creator of the soundtrack show. Right now you're thinking, oh my gosh, David W. Collins is on Coffee with Kenobi, and you would be right. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So glad to be on here and really honored to be invited.
Well, it is an honor to have you, bud. I'm glad we, of course, have chatted over the years, but we actually got to meet at Star Wars Celebration over the summer, and I always have a great time not only talking to you, but listening to you. So, gosh, there's so many directions we could go having someone like you on Coffee with Kenobi. But I think let's just jump right into your sort of, because you just celebrated 20 years with Lucasfilm, correct?
I did, although it's funny because, well, technically it was 23 years ago that I started on the scoring stage, but I went away for a few years to Sony PlayStation, then a company called Achille Interactive. But even when I was away at that time, I was still, it was all the panels that I did for Comic-Con, all the hosting for Star Wars Celebration, the voiceover jobs, the podcasts, the interviews, all of that stuff. I just never lost touch. And when the sale to Disney happened, my phone started ringing and I started, freelance mixing again and writing, trailer cues, like music cues for Star Wars trailers and things like that. And eventually started back at Skywalker Sound full time in January of 2018. And so technically my start date, yes, is from 1999 when I started as an intern. That was 23 years ago. But I figure between all those other things and all the overtime that I clocked in over the years, I wasn't the only one that celebrated their 20 or 30 or even 40-year anniversary that had some time away where they, took a sabbatical to other places, learned a lot, and then brought it back, I suppose. But yes, it was 20 years plus since I started with the company, right around the time of the release of The Phantom Menace.
Well, was beautiful. So you've got your own, as with all of us, we've got our own little hero's journey, our own little paths that we take on the road to do kind of what fuels our passion. And I'll never forget, even though it wasn't that long ago, I just know I'm not going to forget this. You, of course, besides all of your talented things that you're doing with Lucasfilm, you have a podcast. We'll just start with the podcast, the soundtrack show. You and I talked about this briefly because during my day job, I'm a high school English teacher. I teach seniors literature and writing. And of course, what do we talk about? We talk about mythology. We talk about analysis. On the soundtrack show, you do very much the same thing, but from a much, much different medium. Let's talk about the power of analysis and how it enhances these stories we know and love so well.
Sure. Yeah. The soundtrack show is not just a show for musicians. It's for everybody or anybody who enjoys movies like Star Wars or Ghostbusters or Jurassic Park, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future, you name it. And what I do is I go through the actual music that the composers write for these things. Let's say, for example, Star Wars, and I talk about how the themes are kind of working on our subconscious minds and the storytelling that the music is doing, whether you're a musician or not. And I really do cater it to people who are just fans and not particularly musicians. Although if you are, you get a lot out of it as well. But I try and break it down very much like I would if I was a high school music teacher or music appreciation professor at a college or something like that, just to kind of enhance people's enjoyment of the stuff that they already love and just have sort of a deeper angle on something. So I talk a lot about how melodies actually tell stories and how music is a language. It's one that we all understand when it's spoken to us because it works in our subconscious mind. We hear music no matter where we go in our daily lives, but it's not a language that we all, readily speak but we understand it, like I said, when it's spoken to us. So I try and break it down in a way that we can talk about it, and I use examples from the movies and things like that. And it leads to some really, I think, surprising revelations for listeners, and that's the stuff that I get excited about. And that's the stuff that I just can't wait to share. And so that was kind of what started the podcast. I mean, it all started with Star Wars Oxygen, which I did a few years ago. And really loved doing that show. And my desire to branch out kind of met with this offer to go with How Stuff Works, which then turned into iHeartRadio, to do a broader show. And I called it the Soundtrack Show, and I write it and I produce it. And now I actually own it. iHeart gave it back to me to do what I want to do with it, which is really exciting. However, when someone says, "Hey, do you want to supervise sound design, edit, and mix on Star Wars: The Bad Batch?" That's, to quote John Knoll when he was talking about The Phantom Menace, that's not an offer you just turn down. And so what's happened to me over the last few years, the Soundtrack Show got greenlit at the same time I started back at Skywalker Sound. And so it's been, I'm pretty sure it's been the busiest 4.5 to 5 years of my career, these last 5 years, because just everything's happening all at once. And I can't wait to get back to the Soundtrack Show. I think I have something like 100 something episodes up there, but they're not dated. You can listen to them at any time. They're designed to be what they call evergreen. So you can pick it up at any time and it should still be fresh and exciting. I'm not covering the news or something like that in the soundtrack world. I'm really just talking about Jurassic Park or, really just talking about, what's another example of a movie that I did? Tron. Or even video game scores like The Legend of Zelda, that kind of stuff.
Or Rocky. I love
Rocky.
Rocky. Yeah, that was.
Oh,
fantastic.
yeah, I love Rocky. Yeah, Bill Conti's score for Rocky, so good. I also did The Karate Kid, speaking of Bill Conti, and that was really fun. And I have so many more that I want to do. I want to finish out the Lord of the Rings series. I want to do the Star Wars prequels. I want to do films of Kurosawa. I want to do Top Gun. I want to do. There's just, there's so many movies that I would love to do, video games too. And I've been working on one for Hamilton, the Broadway musical, for a long time and trying to get that going. And, West Side Story is another one. I mean, there's just so many that I would love to do. And we'll eventually get there. James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, there's just Hans Zimmer. There's just so much still left to do, and I just can't get it out the door fast enough. So I'm hoping that soon I will get back to it.
I look forward to when you look at Chris Nolan's Batman Begins, because I think there's just a beautiful little mix there of orchestral, and you've got that,
and the Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight as well.
I love the Dark Knight.
I do too. That you actually added Jaws to me. I think there are a lot of films that are wonderful. My favorite film is Raiders of the Lost Ark, like many people of our generation. Yeah. But I think a perfect film is Jaws. Now your episodes on Jaws changed the way I looked at Jaws, and I'm so grateful for that. It really came to life for me. It's absolutely true. And then the part where they show like the scenes of everyone flocking to the beach, and you can hear very, very gently underneath everything is the Jaws theme, almost like Jaws is salivating. Oh, look, here comes the buffet. You said it much more eloquently than I did, but I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, the thing that blew my mind about Jaws was actually a concept that an author named Emilio Audicino uh, kind of got me hip to, which is this idea of, and now I use this phrase all the time when I'm doing sound editing and design, and we're talking about mixes for whatever we're working on with directors, which is this idea of spatial perceptive function. As you start getting into film theory and real nerdy film school stuff, it sounds intimidating. It's really not, but it's the way that edits and camera angles kind of tell you where stuff is in relation to other stuff. So you really kind of understand like where the victims are versus where the shark is, versus where the shark is. And the music is doing all of that work in that movie for the most part. The movie's like 2 hours long. There's like something like just a few minutes of actual shark footage in the whole thing. The rest of it, the mechanical shark, but the rest of it is all music or barrels or music and barrels. The music is doing all of that work to tell you, if it's far away, Aliens does the same thing, by the way, really brilliantly with sound effects. They do it, in that sequence when the aliens are getting closer and they've got that device that tells them that they're getting closer and closer and closer to them. It's the same concept, this idea but that's an actual in-world concept. Here, John Williams is telling you exactly where the shark is in relation to into its victims. And that's what makes it terrifying. All it is just a first-person scuba diver camera going through the water, but a second you add jump, 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 jump. It's terrifying, and that's the kind of stuff we talk about is like, oh, watch how they piece the sequence together. Look at the artistry behind what it is that Spielberg and Williams crafted together, and that's kind of where the show lives.
And see, as you mentioned this at the top of the show, but as an educator myself, I really appreciate how you explain it because, I study literature. I can translate Hamlet. I can do all these things. If you hand me my taxes, I can't figure that out at all. We all have our gifts in different areas. And what your gift is that when you were talking about this, you very much are educating people, whether they are huge fans of music and understand music and how it works. It's almost kind of its own math in its own way, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or for people who just like when something sounds and how it makes them feel. What I tell my students is that, because, you and I talked about this at Celebration. Sometimes people will say, well, how do you know that it means that? And I say, well, here's how we're going to decide this. Because sometimes people, at least from my field, say, well, you can just make anything work because you can't really prove it. And I said, well, we actually can have a really good idea of what these things mean and maybe what the director or the author or the creator is trying to convey. And that is the evidence, the textual evidence or the orchestral evidence itself. That is where you can do a lot of critical thinking and really make this stuff come to life even more.
Yeah, there's always the danger of any sort of literary criticism of making connections that aren't there. That is always something that we talk about. But the fact of the matter is that and it's funny that you mentioned this. This is a really interesting subject to me. It's endlessly fascinating. But there of the thousands of books on literary criticism or music criticism, this is always an issue. What was the composer thinking? What was the intent? And there is actually a difference between the intent and the effect on the audience. And one of the things about my show that I try and hold on to is, my own personal experience working in post-production and working with composers and directors, especially not just in, the video games business, but, working at Skywalker over the last 5 years has done nothing but kind of solidify in my mind a lot of the things that I've said on the show because I watch it happen. And one of the things you watch happen is an audience reaction to something can sometimes be different than what your creative intent was. And I think that's, part of that is because, as artists, we have a subconscious artistic life as well as a conscious one, and as human beings, we have the ability to lie to ourselves or kid ourselves or not even understand where some of our own influences come from when we put them up on the screen, or we write them down on the page. If you're a writer or an artist, but an audience will pick up on it immediately and they'll tell you, a great example is, if it's verifiable by a large number of people, if people can listen to something and say, oh yeah, that clearly sounds like this, then it has merit regardless of the composer's intent. I'll give you a great example. The end of The Phantom Menace, you have this piece called Augie's Great Municipal Band. and it's like da da dum da da dum da 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 dum. Right? That has the same rhythmic shape and the same intervallic shape in terms of the shape of the melody as the Emperor's theme. Da dee da dee da 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 dee da dee dum. Right? The Phantom Menace, indeed. There you've got Palpatine. You're celebrating his victory. He's now the Chancellor. You've now granted him full power, and Naboo has been liberated, et cetera, et cetera. Some people argue, well, that's not what John Williams meant to do. They bring up, the temp music of Philip Glass, and which was used there by this, this film called Koyaanisqatsi. No, Powakatsi was the one, which is a score by Philip Glass. And they'll say, well, no, it's really based on this, which is very similar. And I think to myself, well, yeah, but why did George Lucas choose that? And why did John Williams choose to use a melody that's that similar? Why is it in the same wheelhouse as the Emperor when the whole thing is called the Phantom Menace? Why can I point this out? And 2,000 people in a crowd will gasp because they hear it too, and we all hear it. So in a certain way, it almost doesn't, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. If John Williams sat there and went, yes, I know, I'm going to secretly hide the Emperor's theme as an Easter egg here. And it's like, maybe he did. And I think he's done that a lot in Star Wars. There certainly are examples that are clearly intentional where he laced in, Easter eggs of other themes within themes. This example seems to be debated because there's no clear interview of it. There's no clear connective tissue, although I would argue there is, because you hear the Emperor's theme a million times in that. But sorry, this is just one case example of what you're talking about with literary criticism or music criticism. You can find these connections, and to quote this professor named Dr. Robert Greenberg, it's like, if it is identifiable, it has merit regardless of creative intent. Again, because the music lives on long past all of the art that we do. What you put up on the screen is a collection of so many different creative minds, and to quote John Williams himself when he was talking about the power of music, there's two sides to music, just like there's two sides to writing. There's the musicians or the composers, but music is only music when it is heard by an audience. Literature is only literature when it is read by the reader. And there is a relationship there, a symbiotic circle. You must understand this. There is a relationship there between, musicians and audience, and writers and readers, and both bring an exchange to the table. And so that's the interesting thing about where literary criticism lives. This is an audience reaction, right? We're reacting as an audience to these things, and all I'm doing is just expanding upon that reaction. And so that is another piece of the puzzle. And oftentimes, I sound like I sound like an overexcited, teacher right now, but
hey, you're at the right place.
Yeah. Well, I just know that this is what you do, so I just went straight into it. But, we have a subconscious life in the art that we consume. And so do the artists. And it's fun to find these things. It's interesting to make these connections. And to me, when I heard da dee da be da da, I heard the Emperor's theme. And for someone to just say, "Well, you're flat out wrong," okay, but I heard it, and I hear it every single time. So I want to discuss that, right? And I'm not the only one that hears it, especially when I pointed it out. So that has merit, and that merit is what we discuss.
I think you've got a graduate thesis here. You legitimately do. What I tell people is, look, this is what I want you to do. I want you to use critical thinking and intellectual honesty to really take an actual observational look at this, because as I said earlier, the proof for me is the text. For what we're talking about here, it's the music itself. You can hear it.
It's the notes.
You can hear
it's the rhythmic shape. It's the intervals.
It's the Jungian archetypes that Joseph Campbell talked about that first drew George Lucas into the world of the hero's journey. The hero with 1,000 faces. That there are these certain things that we connect to subconsciously. And it's brilliant and it's fascinating. And what you were doing is illuminating different ways not only to enjoy these stories, but to show us, we're talking about John Williams or George Lucas. We're talking about geniuses. We're talking about actual geniuses who know their craft backwards and forwards. Was everything perfectly intended? Well, isn't that kind of nice not to always know the answer to that? But when you're really good at something, you do things sometimes either purposefully or intuitively. You look at Michael Jordan, for example.
That's exactly right. That's
what I mean?
exactly right.
On the basketball
is a big
court,
part of it.
Absolutely. He's thinking about what he's going to do. He has intent and purpose, but some things just take over. When you've got those kind of talents, then you open.
It takes longer to think about it than it does to reflex it. It takes longer to express it. It takes longer to express it than to actually live it.
Right, and to not take it at least seriously is almost anti-intellectual. I dare say.
Yeah. It's. I love the idea of instinctive writing, and to be honest, I've had this experience so many times where I've placed, either as a composer or as someone that's written material for like video games or has done a mix on like Star Wars Resistance or Bad Batch or even Obi-Wan when I mixed on that. And I go and I just kind of look at these forums and I watch YouTube videos and I watch people react in ways that I did not anticipate. But then once they do, I go, oh, of course. No, that is. And then you start seeing it multiple times and you go, oh, isn't that interesting? So I didn't even pick up on that when I was putting that sound in there or whatever it is. And you actually watch people react to something that you didn't even think about that you did. I've had that happen to me. So I know that happens with writers and artists and creators, that people interpret their work, sometimes differently than how it was intended. And you can't invalidate that, especially if multiple, it's not just a one-off, like, a lot of people see it, I remember when we did The Force Unleashed, this video game, from 2008, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. We had this character, Darth Vader's secret apprentice, and he was known as Darth Vader's secret apprentice. And we weren't going to give away his name until later on in the game when we said his name, although his name ended up changing in the novel. It doesn't matter. But when we got into the first level of gameplay, the code name for him, kind of like this is Echo 1 to Echo 7 or whatever. His code name was I can't remember what it was. This is base command to Star Killer. You need to go and find this blah blah. And I thought, oh, Star Killer, what a fun nod to the original script of Star Wars. Good job, Hayden. That's great. When the reviews came out, his name was Star Killer. Everyone just said, oh, his name is Star Killer. But we never, at least I never consciously registered while I was making the game for 2 years that his name or his code name was going to be Star Killer. But because the character Juno said that to him in the communications as he landed on each planet, his name became Star Killer. And that's what the press called him. That's what fans called him. And now that is what he is called, and that to me was like a powerful lesson of like, oh, well, in the absence of information, guess what? The entire world will fill in the blanks, that is exactly what happened there. Now, and then I said this to Hayden Blackman, and Hayden was like, well, no, I always kind of knew he was called Star Killer. I'm like, but you never presented that in any of the story meetings. And you never, we never talked about it. We talked about whether or not his name was Galen Merrick or Jacob Nyan, or we had all these different names. And then George Lucas came in and said, maybe you should call him this or that. And we never really got it out there until the novelization, and we just called him Star Killer as a code name. He's like, well, yeah, but no, he's kind of Star Killer. And I just thought, oh man, well, the team was surprised. So, or at least I was surprised, so sometimes when you're working on something and you're so close to something, you're not always going to see and or hear everything that you're putting into a piece of work. And that's what the audience does. The audience is, it's just like you don't know when you're going to make something that's going to be a huge hit or it's going to be a total flop. Sometimes you think but then things surprise you. Things resonate sometimes in ways that are totally unexpected. Whether it's timing, whether it's something that you're seeing or not seeing, or whether or not everyone's kind of feeling on the same page as whatever it is you're working on. But I know we're waxing philosophical here, very right off the bat. Thanks for everyone who's still sticking with this interview. But yeah, I mean, these things are things that I think about constantly. Most of what I say, just to kind of back up, is usually a quote from the reading that I do, or the interviews that I scour, or the liner notes that I pick up on. Most of the stuff that I talk about, I'm just kind of pointing it out, putting it together, and using a podcast as the perfect medium for a show about music. I play the piano. I do these things to kind of demonstrate all of this information in that medium, because that medium lends itself to listening and to putting various pieces of information together and then giving examples, but a lot of what I say or talk about is absolutely intentional by the composer, absolutely intentional by the director. And I break down theories as to why. And I say, I'm pretty sure it's this because think about the emotional effect it has when you play this clip, and then I'll play a clip from Goonies or whatever. How does that make you feel and why? And how do composers use different modes like major and minor to make you happy or sad? And why are they employing them here? What is it doing to the story? How does it relate to the character arc? These are all of the discussions that we have. It sounds really nerdy. I promise you it's a lot of fun. Like we have a good time. It's really about storytelling, and I try and tell stories about music. That's really, I guess, the secret sauce of the soundtrack show.
I don't find it nerdy at all. I find it invigorating and refreshing. And I'm really grateful that next week I go back to school to start my 17th year so I can use some of this, because talk about oxygen. This is the kind of stuff that Coffee with Kenobi listeners love and live for. And I don't need to tell people who if you've never listened to the soundtrack show, then obviously now that you need to subscribe, and you've got a wonderful backlog of incredible things that will enhance all these stories. Because as we were saying, stories take on a life of themselves. They're going to hit us in very, very different ways in different places and phases in our lives. That to me is really, really inspiring. Another thing that's inspiring is that for you had, where when you were growing up, like where did you find, like how did you find your steps to where you are right now? Did you study music in school? Did you study sound and sound design, or how did you kind of get to where you are now?
That's a great question. So growing up, my older brother played a lot of baseball, a lot of soccer, a lot of basketball. And I did all those things too. That's what everyone did in my hometown. And I was okay, but I wasn't as good as he was. And I remember wanting to stay home from baseball games on weekends so I could watch Return of the Jedi or Empire Strikes Back because it just came out on Showtime, or wanting to stay and tape that Transformers special that was on the air. And I was just obsessed with science fiction and movies and TV shows like He-Man or G.I. Joe or anything to do with fantasy. I'm a kid of the 80s, so all of those movies, the Indiana Jones series and Goonies and Ghostbusters and E.T. and that's another soundtrack show I've been prepping forever and just haven't gotten out the door yet.
I hope you do a G.I. Joe one, by the way. I would go wild.
G.I. Joe and Transformers. Well, I did Transformers the movie. I did an interview with Vince DiCola, which was really fun. But where was I? Yeah, the inspiration just came. Really, I started doing community theater and musical theater starting around, I guess, third grade. But in the fifth grade, I saw this local children's theater production, and I signed up the following year, and I got involved with this children's theater network. And by the time I was 14, 15 years old, this children's theater network was statewide in the state of California, and they started flying me around to play parts. So because I was, 14, 15-year-old boy that could sing and could dance a little bit and could act, a lot of times they would be like, okay, well, we're doing a production of, I don't know, Oliver in Long Beach, and there's no one to play this male role, and we need someone your age. Can you come down and do it? We'll fly you down. We'll put you in a homestay situation. We'll fly you back. And so by the time I was 14, 15 years old, I was on an amateur level touring with a couple of buddies of mine, and we were going off, I'm flying to San Diego this weekend and we're going to do Grease for the 10th time because I've known this script forever. And by the way, while we're there, we're going to rehearse for You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which opens in the spring, and then we'll fly you back, blah, blah, blah. That eventually led to touring in Russia a couple times, going to Paris, all with this children's theater network. And I was doing a lot of community theater. And of course, as a kid, I was obsessed with MTV and rock music. And so I got a drum kit when I was, and I'd been in band before that, but then I got braces. So my trumpet career went down the tubes and I started playing drums. We all rehearsed and I had a band, we actually took it to Elektra Records when I was 16 years old and tried to get a record deal. It didn't work out, but they gave us like a whole bundle of CDs and took us into this room and said, take whatever you want and keep working on your music. And so we did, and we rehearsed over at my garage, which meant that all the guitars and keys and microphones and drums were always left in my garage. So I would sit down there for hours and just pick up every instrument and figure out how to play it. So I play guitar and bass and piano and drums and all that stuff and was obsessed with it. And ultimately, when I got into college, I was a theater and music double major, and I just didn't know which direction I wanted to go. But I was obsessed with Star Wars, and I started really reading a lot about Skywalker Sound. And I decided, I don't know if I'm going to like go to Broadway or whatever, but there's this school called Berklee College of Music in Boston that I've been interested in ever since I was like, 13, 14 years old when I first got a brochure. And I applied and I got in and I did my postgraduate work there. And for whatever reason, because maybe it was because the special editions had just come out and the Phantom Menace and the prequels were coming, I laser focused on Skywalker Sound. And I took I said this to a professor, and I said, I want to work at Skywalker Sound. Can you tell me all the courses I should take in order to gear towards that? And I had been scouring early internet days, like scouring the website about internships there, and I applied. But it was so early internet that applying was, here's the address, go send all this stuff in the mail, because the internet was still very young and you weren't like submitting things online. You were just reading about it and then putting it in the mail. And I, through many twists of fate, it's a much longer story, got my internship in 1999 and worked on the scoring stage there for about a year, and then started at LucasArts full time as things were kind of slowing down at Skywalker at that time. LucasArts there was more work than I could possibly handle. And the PlayStation 2 came out that first year that I was there. And it was this kind of perfect blend of my love of Star Wars, my love of movies, my love of music, my love of voiceover and acting. And that's really where the voiceover started, because the theater major in me came out. That first year I was there would be this email coming out that would go out from the voice department saying, hey, the designers want to record some scratch dialogue for this game. If you're interested in coming up and recording some scratch, which basically means, temporary dialogue so they can try out the lines in the game and place them in the game. Come on up to the booth at this time. And I did. I jumped at it. And a few years later, they used some of my recordings in Knights of the Old Republic and a couple of other games. And because they did that, they had to Taft-Hartley me into the union. And one of the producers there said, hey, this is really good. I heard you did this. My wife is an agent. When you're ready, put together a demo. And so I did. Took me like a year. Anyway, long story short, by 2005, I had an agent in San Francisco and I was auditioning and doing all kinds of stuff while I was still working at LucasArts. And then my voice was going into almost every game we shipped, because it was like, there's this other tutorial we need to do. Dave, Star Wars Battlefront, the original from 2004. We had a tutorial right before we shipped. David, can you do an Imperial officer? Sure. All right, get in the booth. And capturing command post, a primary objective, like that stuff. So like, those were like my first voiceover gigs professionally, it just seemed like this perfect, blend of all my interests. And I just attacked it. I mean, I really did. I worked so hard, and I made dozens of Star Wars games in the, decade plus that I was there. That's kind of how it all started. Long story short, sorry, I just kind of babbled, but you find who you are as a young person, almost by process of elimination, and you just listen to that inner voice. And I was lucky enough to have some really good experiences and some very supportive parents. And found my, it's like, did you see the ILM documentary that just came out?
Oh, yes.
When they're like, I found my people, I found my crew, I found where I belong. That's exactly how I felt. It's exactly how I felt, and when you listen to that voice inside, if you listen to that voice in you, and you just know when you're doing what it is that you want to be doing. And that's I was lucky enough to have that happen.
Stephen Covey has this great book, Now Know Your Strengths. Because I worked when I was growing up. I very much, I of course love Star Wars. Like I said, I think we're very much of a similar age bracket there. And I just kept saying, I eventually stopped finding reasons why I shouldn't do something, and I only started looking for reasons why I should. And once you commit to that, now know your strengths, then doors start to open up for you, and opportunities start to open up for you. Once you are honest with yourself about where your strengths are, where your passions are, and good things happen. So I really appreciate you sharing this because I find it quite inspiring.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, Stephen Covey. I think I read in college, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that was Stephen Covey as well.
That's it. That's where that quote comes from.
Yeah. And, it's really true that the line that George Lucas has about your focus determines your reality is just so true. I mean, he's putting all of these, he's putting all of this wisdom in his script all the time. When I was mixing Star Wars Resistance and I was up at the ranch, this must have been 2018. And Lucasfilm was doing this sort of like Lucasfilm Heritage screening series. And Ron Howard was in the building mixing Solo while I was mixing Resistance. And they decided to do an American Graffiti screening. And I, of course, went to it. It was there at the Stag Theater in the ranch. And they had all this memorabilia up, and they had this whole party. And then afterwards, they did a Q&A with Ron Howard and George Lucas, just for Sky Sound and Lucasfilm employees. I was like dying. Wow. It was just so amazing. And George starts going on about how, the themes in THX and American Graffiti and Star Wars, the original Star Wars, they're all kind of the same. The farm boy trying to leave the farm, the hero's journey, that sort of things. And he talks about Richard Dreyfuss's character for whatever reason. Now that I'm in front of a microphone, I can't remember his name. But he kind of puts a box around himself about not wanting to go off to college. Like he's in a cage of his own design, and he finds reasons all through the evening not to go and leave his town because he's afraid. He's scared. He's scared to basically, take the next step to venture out, to cross the threshold, I guess you'd say it in Joseph Campbell terms.
Sure. Refusal of the call.
Refusal of the call. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of what that's about. And I just think, man, this guy is just constantly just dropping all this wisdom on his audience all the time. And for me, Lucasfilm, I follow Lucasfilm the way people follow their favorite baseball team. I always have, even the movies that aren't that popular, I've seen multiple times, there's just something about that company that I follow. Like it's my favorite TV show or my favorite, like it's the San Francisco Giants or something. Like I just follow them, all the time because I believe in George Lucas and his messages all the time. And I remember, sitting in a theater, seeing Titanic, sitting in a theater, watching Saving Private Ryan, sitting in a theater, watching Jurassic Park, Lost World, Terminator 2, all these movies, and just going, wow, this is all ILM and Skywalker Sound. This is all Ben Burt, Gary Rydstrom, Dennis Murin, all of these artists working for George Lucas. This seems to be where all of the innovation is. And there's a permanence to that art. Like the art lasts. I'm still looking at something from 1977. And here I am in my 20s watching something that came out when I was 2. I want to be a part of that. I don't know how to be a part of that, but I want to be a part of that. And I know what my interests are. And everything about positive thinking in terms of where could my skill set complement this group, vocation is defined as, where your greatest strength meets the world's greatest needs, something like that. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but that's really what I was trying to find is in that, again, crossing the threshold from college or being a young person into being, an adult. I wanted to use my skills and my passion in a way that was useful. I wanted to be useful. And I was lucky enough to find it. And it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to work out. I mean, I was at Skywalker Sound and I could not get more hours to save my life. And then I went off and I interned in another studio and that was kind of a bust. And then I went off and played in this band and that was kind of a bust. And I was like, man, the door doesn't seem to be opening for me here. I don't know why. And I made the decision to leave Skywalker to go to LucasArts, which is, a big deal because Skywalker is like, I mean, they're mixing, while I was there working on whatever I was working on, they were mixing Galaxy Quest, and they were mixing Jurassic Park 3, and they were mixing, we were doing foreign versions of the Phantom Menace and getting ready to do AI and Harry Potter and like all this other stuff. And I made the decision to leave. And I love video games and I loved LucasArts, and so I was excited about it, but I had to pivot. I guess that's the point, is that, I just jumped through whatever window opened, and just trusted that it was right, because I needed to keep moving forward and finding what it is that I'm supposed to do. And when you're in the middle of it, you just don't know. You just have to kind of go with your gut. And certainly there are practical reasons. I wanted to, have money and be able to pay for my car and my rent and my phone. And, and as an intern, I couldn't really do those things. So there are practical considerations as well, but all of those lead you to these choices. And so I just took a leap of faith that, I know I'm leaving Skywalker Ranch to go to the games group, but I had such a good interview with them and I had such a good feeling. And I said, I know that this is like a bold move, because I'd never worked on a video game in my life,
Right.
This is a bold move, and I did it, and it worked out, and I took a crash course, and I worked as I went, and I locked myself in my little sound office there and figured it out. But I was scared. I was really scared. And
sure,
that's natural. It's a natural, normal thing.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we return with more from David W. Collins. I'm Dan Zehr, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
What we're talking about here, whether we're talking about a fiction or we're talking about our lives, the stories matter. I feel like the stories that stick with us the longest, are the ones that have parallels to the real world. Mark Twain, one of my favorite Twain quotes is, "Fiction is obliged to tell the truth." Whereas we're not all a scrawny kid during World War II who takes a super serum and becomes Captain America. We all can certainly relate to people not necessarily believing us or seemingly being in the way of our dreams, or we find ourselves in the way of our own dreams. And then finally, things happen, you start saying yes, and you start getting the right people in your corner, and then things start to blossom for you, which is exactly a great story. You mentioned your passion, your schooling, your friends, your parents, and then you're working in sound and music and things that you love. This is changing gears a little bit, but you're the perfect person to ask this. Every year when I watch the Oscars, I hear sound effects editing and sound mixing. So can you explain to me what the difference is between those two things?
Sure. Yeah. So, sound editing,
a rough transition, I know.
No. Well, let me just say here, I'll help you. I'll help you get there. So, just to wrap up our whole sort of hero's journey conversation and
Sure.
The paths that we try and take, and this will lead to sound editing and mixing, which is what I'm doing now. When I came back to Skywalker Sound, it wasn't until 2018, almost 20 years from when I interned. That's how long that pivot took. I mean, I had amazing journeys, got to do amazing things and a lot of happy accidents along the way, playing roles in games and movies and getting to host at Star Wars Celebration and working on a ton of Star Wars games and, doing music analysis, podcasting and all kinds of stuff. What an adventure. But the door back to Skywalker didn't happen until 2018, at which point I was married with a child, living in Los Angeles, away from Skywalker Ranch, and it was 19 years after I interned. That's how long that took. So from the outside looking in, it's when you see people doing things, I read a lot of biographies and autobiographies about filmmakers or actors or musicians or whatever, and they all share common struggles that we don't think about because we just see the art that they make. But in order to get those opportunities or to have those things happen, there's so much manifesting that they're doing, in order to get those lucky breaks, and I was 42, 43 when I got to come back to the ranch. And when I started as I was asked to come back to work on a new animated series. That is not a call you deny. Even though it meant that I, had to start flying back and forth from LA to San Francisco. And my son was less than a year old. I figured out how to make it work, going back and forth. My wife was very supportive, and I started sound editing and sound mixing on a show called Star Wars Resistance. What sound editing is you're given a scene, and the scene really just has dialogue in it. And, the picture department, if they put together the cut, they've done some temporary music and temporary effects in order to try and get the idea of how it's going to work. But I need to, with a sound effects library, and this is what sound designers do. Designers actually go out and they record and they make sounds to put into something that doesn't exist, like a new creature or a new ship or something. And I need to edit all of those into a scene. So if a scene is a minute long and it takes place in a starport hangar, then I need to cut in the background of what that hangar sounds like. And if a droid rolls by, I'm cutting by the sound of the droid, because, in a movie, what was actually done on the day is not really usable, and you don't want to hear it anyway. And half the time there's a director going, okay, now move to the droid, move it to the left, there, and stop, and background, and, so you can't use any of that anyway. In animation, there is no set. There are no footsteps. There's no feet. It's all on a computer. It doesn't exist. So it's completely and utterly silent. There are no sounds. Every hand pat, every handshake, every sound of a squeaky chair inside of a cockpit, every button push, every laser blast, every explosion, every door opening and closing, every creature, every gust of wind is something that I place by hand with sound effects out of a sound effects library or sound effects that I've recorded or designed myself. And I place those into a scene. Well, as you can imagine, that ends up being hundreds of, if not thousands of separate elements. Oh. And that's just effects and music. Then there's dialogue. Then there's what's called Foley. And Foley artists are artists that actually sit in a dark room, put on different pairs of shoes. You'll have a different pair of shoes for Hera versus a different pair of shoes for Kanan versus a different pair of shoes for Zeb. And they'll walk footsteps, mic'd up surfaces in a dark room. They'll walk footsteps on every different surface for every different character. And then they'll do things like props, the sound of them, picking up a blaster and cocking it or something like that. And they walk all of those per episode, edit it and give it to me. Then I get all of Kevin Kiner's music or Joseph Tavera's music, depending on what the show is. Natalie Holt's music for Obi-Wan. John Williams, which I'll get to in a second when I mix that episode of Obi-Wan. And you get all of those elements, and now you need to present them together in a cohesive way. If you're in a big space, you want it to reverberate like a big space. If you're outdoors, you want it to slap and echo like it's outdoors. If the shot goes from, right in front of the camera to suddenly someone's walking far away, you're going to turn those down. You're going to filter out the high end so it sounds kind of muffled, and you're going to turn up the reverb because it sounds far away. And then when they come back into the next shot, they're over here, if there's a ship pass by, you're going to what's called pan, which is position the ship passing by from left to right or backward and forward. And you're going to move those sounds through space in surround sound. And then you're going to manage all the levels, and you're going to kind of add that last level of polish and excitement and make some real creative choices about whether or not the music's going to take over, whether or not the sound effects are going to take over, whether or not it's going to be, ducked under dialogue, or whether or not it's okay if you don't hear that dialogue because you really want that explosion to be loud. That's mixing. And there is, speaking of, symbiotic relationships, there is a symbiotic relationship between mixing and editing, because your edit's no good without a great mix, and a mix is no good if you don't have great edits to mix. A lot of people in sound are aware of this confusion, and they want those two awards combined, and just have it be sound, because they're, and for someone like me who on Bad Batch, for example, and even my episode of Obi-Wan that I did the second episode on Dayu.
Oh yeah.
I edited that episode with my colleague Kevin Bolin, and then I mixed it, and I was still cutting while I was editing. And then the director comes in and they give notes, like Deb Chow is like, oh, it'd be great to get more crowd over here. And it'd be great if you turn that up over there and maybe futz that over there. And then she goes away for a few days, and I keep editing and I keep mixing, So for someone like me coming from animation at Skywalker Sound, you're kind of expected in the pole position on that show to do it all. Take the Foley from here, take the music from here, cut all the sound, take all the dialogue, edit that, put it all together and mix it. You're like a one person show. A great mixer named Bonnie Wild. She was the one that was doing it on Rebels, and she trained me. And it really is like, it is a sink or swim type of situation where you're doing everything. But traditionally there was your mix department, your edit department and all of that. And they were very separate. But, for my money, I think that they're just two sides of the same coin, I should say. That was a long explanation, but that's a great explanation of what it is that I do and how I spend my time at Skywalker.
Well, I really appreciate that because I've wondered that for a long time, and you explained it succinctly and eloquently as you do all things. So I don't know
how succinct that was, Dan. I'll be honest. That was pretty. I
wouldn't want it dumb, but here's the thing: I don't want it dumbed down. I want to know. I mean, loquacious is fine if it's getting me from point A to point B. And you're making, like all things, you're making us think. You're enlightening us, and you do it. And I'm telling you, as an educator myself, it takes a certain kind of someone to be able to communicate challenging things or things that not everyone instantly takes towards in a certain ways. And I very much appreciate you saying that the way that you did.
Thank you.
It's very, very true. Well, my goodness, it would be very, very easy to take up more of your time and just hear you talk. So often, sometimes when I talk to people who I hear on podcasts or actors or things like that, I find myself just kind of listening, like I'm listening to a show. But I wasn't actually listening to the soundtrack show. But I very much appreciate your time, David. Love to have you back on Coffee with Kenobi anytime. All the work you're doing is magnificent. You're adding so much to the Bad Batch, to Obi-Wan, to everything in Star Wars. I really, really appreciate what you bring into the world of Lucasfilm, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the invitation. It's always fun to come out and chat about these things. And thanks for listening. Thanks to all of your listeners. And if I may, I wanted to just kind of update you on a couple of things before I go.
Please. And I'd love to have you share where people can reach out to you if they want to ask you anything or just say hello as well.
Great. Yeah. I mean, the easiest way to find me is on Twitter or Instagram at David W. Collins. Please reach out and say hello. I love having conversations there. The soundtrack show is more of it is coming. You can find it wherever you download podcasts, Spotify, Apple, whatever. For me right now, just wanted to give your listeners a couple of little things that I'm working on. As a voiceover artist, I love doing all the, I've done Mandalorian and movies and little voices here and there. Some of my biggest parts, if you're a fan of anime, I did a show called One Punch Man. I did a thing called Sword Art Online Alicization, where I play this character Kayaba that created this video game world. I'm the dad in Boss Baby, not the new one, but the 4 seasons of the one that came out, Voltron, right. Some other stuff. But I have a lot of really exciting stuff coming up. And one of the biggest things that I'm working on right now is actually the Disney Plus series Willow. And I'm the supervising sound editor and the ADR supervisor, meaning I'm kind of re-recording actors when we need to for script additions or to replace noisy lines on set if there's like a wind or rain machine, et cetera. And that's the showrunner on that is John Kasdan. That's just been that is the joy of my life right now, is working on that series. It's so fun because I remember so clearly seeing it in the theaters when I was 12. Tales of the Jedi, Lego Star Wars Summer Vacation, and of course, season 2 of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. These are all things that I've just been pouring myself into. It's why I haven't gotten more soundtrack show episodes out the door. It has been one of the most rewarding times of my life as a sound and voice artist, and I can't wait for everyone to see and hear all these different projects, and can't wait to talk to you maybe sometime in the future about them.
Sounds wonderful. Well, David, thank you again so much for being a guest on Coffee with Kenobi.
You bet. Thank you so much, Dan.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Zehr, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
A huge thank you to David W. Collins for his wonderful guest appearance here on Coffee with Kenobi. I also want to thank each and every one of you for listening every week and for letting everybody know about not only the show, but Facebook Live. I also want to thank the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. If you want a no-cost, no-obligation quote and a way to plan your magical vacation and support me and Coffee with Kenobi in the process, go to coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. They can help you get to the Galactic Star Cruiser, Galaxy's Edge, the theme parks, the cruise lines, or Star Wars Celebration next year in London. I've worked with them several times, and I can assure you they are the absolute best. Coffee with Kenobi will be live this Monday night at an alternate time just for next week. It's going to be at 6:30, where I will be at Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois for Star Wars Night. Every year, Major League Baseball does some really cool promotional things, and there is a Star Wars Night throughout the United States for Major League Baseball parks. And Wrigley Field, of course, is one of the oldest, and of course, to me, the most iconic, because I'm a Cubs fan. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but that's the way it is. So join me on Monday night at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I will give you a tour of Wrigley Field and show you all the cool Star Wars things happening at the ballpark. Please join us in a CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group for Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler and drama-free place at coffeewithkenobi.com/community, or you can just go to Facebook and type in CWK Cafe. Coffee with Kenobi is possible because of the members of the CWK Alliance. Thanks to you, the podcast, Facebook Live, event coverage, and so much more comes to life. Find out how you can help the show for as little as $1 a month by joining the CWK Alliance, and you will receive access to CWK Pour-Over, an exclusive weekly audio and video podcast not heard anywhere else at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. And 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Coffeewithkenobi.com is your place for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. You can absolutely email me, Dan Z, at coffeewithkenobi.com. Connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zehr, MRZEHR, or on Instagram, Dan Zehr, CWK. Coffee with Kenobi is all over social media, including Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. Give the show a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, or subscribe to Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel. Please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And if you like the logo that Corey designed for Coffee with Kenobi, go to coffeewithkenobi.com/shop for t-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, and so much more. If you are starting a podcast or a blog and want to expand your brand, danzmedia.com is where you can go and chat with me and make an appointment to get that process started. I'm also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. Thanks again for joining me this week. We will see you next Monday night at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time for Facebook Live from Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois for Star Wars Night. Thanks again, everybody, and remember, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.